So here is our model of Dandelion, all primed in black and good to go. And during this tutorial we're going a little bit back and forth on colors, but the end result is worth it, I promise. So we're gonna start with these skin tones with Night Questor Flesh. Now, as you can see, I'm leaving the eye sockets black. If you're able to, then this is an ideal starting point to paint in the eyes and creating a small, tiny black outline around it. So with Palette Witch Flesh, I'm painting in the white of the eye, and as you can see, I'm leaving some of that black surrounding the white, and that way the eye really pops out, it really speaks. Now with black we're gonna paint in a tiny black pupil, and if you find yourself having too much black surrounding the eye, you can kind of push that back with the base color. So it's always wise to do so in an early stage, because if you kind of mess up the skin or the eye, you don't have to repeat all the process you did before. Next up, I'm mixing some Kislev Flesh into the Night Questor Flesh and brightening up the skin tone, covering about 70% of the skin probably, so just leave some dark areas where they should be. So the lighter parts should be the top part of the face, the cheekbones, the eyelids, the nose, the lips, the chin, and of course on his hands here the fingers, and leave the room in between those fingers darker. Now we're gonna repeat this process with pure Kislev Flesh, brightening up the skin tone even more, and this time focusing on smaller areas. Now he is looking up a little bit, so his face is nice and bright. I am using Caribou Crimson to very gently paint his lips. I'm thinning it down a little bit so that his lips have a slightly different color than the rest of the skin. And now it's time for a final highlight with a mixture of Kislev Flesh and some Palette Witch Flesh to about a 50-50 mix. Just touching those very tips of the cheekbones, the tip of the nose, concentrating on small areas. For the hands, for example, it's just the knuckles and maybe the fingernails. And then we're all done with the skin, and we're going to paint the hair with Rhinox Hide as a base color. Next, we're highlighting that with some pure Mournfang Brown. Leave some of that darker part shining through. And don't forget the mustache and the tiny beard. In the next step, I'm mixing some Balor Brown into the Mournfang Brown and highlight it even further. And what I'm trying to do here, especially on the mustache, is create tiny vertical lines as to get the illusion of individual hair strands. I'm picking out some of those front hairs on his head as well, just to add some different colors, highlights and detail. Once this is done, it's time to paint the coat, and we're using Phoenician purple to paint the majority of it. Now there is some color shining through, and we're going to paint that later on, so don't really worry too much about what goes where, just paint the entire coat in this color. For the pants, I'm using Vorbak Red for at least one part of the two colors that are showing here. And I'm picking out the upper color, so to say, so the highest part, and the darker parts in between are a bit more recessed, a bit more in the background, and we're gonna give that a different color later on. I'm also painting the hat in the same color. Now with Tuscar fur, I'm painting the areas in between. So they are a brighter color, but deeper. As in the position is deeper than the rest. Next highlight will be with Wild Rider Red, and I'm painting some of those areas of the previously painted Tuscar fur parts in a brighter variant, focusing mainly on the front and the more visible parts of the pants, just to add some detail and different color there. Now the parts of the coat, the in-between parts, we're painting with Vorbak Red again. Same color as we used before on the pants, which will be the inner color for those parts that are showing through on his sleeves. Then I'm taking some Macragge blue, and with that I'm painting the what is this called? Arm decoration, shoulder patch, I'm not really sure. You see what I mean here. There is probably an English word for that, but I'm lost for that. So also the tiny band around the hat I painted with the same colors, and the edges of those sleeves and coat are painted in the same color as well. Next I'm mixing some Genestealer purple and Vorbak red together and highlight the upper part of the coat. Leave some of that color that we painted before shining through, and it really blends together quite nice. I'm also using the same color on the previously painted Vorbak red on the pants. And this way, by combining these colors and repeating the same colors on the coat and pants, we're kind of working towards each other color-wise, but have a different base color. I'm using the color on the hat as well, and at this stage I'm using pure Genestealer. I thinned it down quite a bit and painted over the highlighted areas on the pants, so to kind of blend those colors together. So you get some brightness shining through and still a tiny bit of the base color. This works very nicely as a shade. Next we're going to be highlighting it a little bit more by mixing some Cacophony purple and Fulgrim pink. Again, picking out those tiny folds on the pants, but now focusing just on the very top part of the clothing, the part which would reflect the most light. Next, we're wearing his tights with a mixture of Sotek green and Incubi darkness. Once this has dried, we're going over it with pure Sotek green to highlight that with the original color. Focusing on the knees, the calves here, the parts that will reflect the most light as always. Now with some XV88 I'm painting the necklace around his neck here. And we're going for a non-metallic metal look. There is some gold details on his coat as well, which I'm painting here. Some stitching. Just follow the pattern. We're going to highlight all those colors we painted before with some Zamesi Desert. And when painting non-metallic metal, it's always good to keep in mind where your light is coming from. And that when you're creating a reflection, the reflection should always come from the same side. So when painting, for example, these discs on the chain, your reflection should be the same on every single one, or at least the same direction. So it's coming from the right, for example, all the glow should be on the same side. Now you can see me doing so with this mixture of Dorn Yellow and Zamesi Desert to create the second highlight, putting a reflection, a tiny dot on the exact same side on every part. And that adds to the realism of reflection, because the light is coming from the same way. Next I'm painting the boots with a pure Thonlia brown. Next I'm washing it with some Agrax Earthshade. And all that's left on his body now is his shirt. There is a scarf here and some sleeves coming underneath his coat. I'm painting with a mixture of Genestealer Purple and Palette Witch Flesh to create a very bright purple look. And I'm also painting the feather on his hat with this color. Once everything is dry, I'm using a very thin down version of Druchii Violet to add some shading in there. And then it's time for a highlight on this as well by mixing some Palette Witch Flesh into the Genestealer Purple. And paint some of those outlines and top parts that will catch the most light. I'm doing so again, but increasing the amount of Palette Witch Flesh for a final highlight. And now it's time for the Lute. I'm using Doomble Brown as a base color for all the wood. For now, ignore all the tiny details on the front, we're gonna pick those out later on. I'm using a dry brush and some Baylor brown to pick out all those gold details on the front of the lute. That looks quite nice already. I wanted to have a bit more of a golden look, so I'm repeating this process by doing so again with Earl Yellow. With Thorn Yellow I'm painting the strings of the instrument. Just by holding my brush sideways like this, makes it quite easy to pick out those individual strings, and leaving some of the black in the middle. Next up is Mornfang Brown, and with this I'm highlighting the boots. To paint the entire base, which is a wooden board and a chest he's standing on, I'm using Thondia Brown again. So yes, I might as well have done that while painting the boots, but it was a last minute thought. Once this is dry, I'm doing some highlighting here with Talarn Sand. Painting the edges of the planks, the boards, the chest, and painting in some wood grain. Once this is done, I'm washing the entire base with Agrax Earthshade. And we have a beautiful wooden base. Now on this base there are some tiny roses lying. And we're painting the greens with Caliban Green, the stem of the rose and some leaves. We highlight those with Lorraine Forest. Just pick out those leaves, part of the stem, and leave some of the original dark green shining through. And finally, a final highlight of Elysian Green finishes it off. Finally, the roses themselves. I'm using Corn Red as a base color, which we're going to be highlighting later on. And for the highlight, we're going to be using Evil Sun Scarlet, just to pick out those top leaves. And here's our final result for Dandelion from The Witcher Path of Destiny. I'm really satisfied with the end result, and I love how colorful he is and how happy he looks, holding his lute and playing his music. Now if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing to the channel, as I'll be making a lot more videos and I'll keep you notified on any new one. So please follow me on my YouTube channel and also consider subscribing to my Patreon page, as I'll be making a lot more and different content there. For now, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in one of my next videos. Bye bye!